Hi, my name is Steve Rachui. I am a premier field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is part 11 of an ongoing series talking about software updates in Configuration Manager. Today's discussion will focus on Windows Update for Business, what it is really, and ultimately its integration into Configuration Manager. A bit of an agenda about what we're going to talk about, a lot of ground to cover. So I want to talk about what Windows Update for Business actually is, why we as Config Manager admins or IT admins really care about it, the requirements for using Windows Update for Business, a couple of scenarios where Windows Update for Business might be useful, really walk through configuring, implementing, managing Windows Update for Business. This will just be without Config Manager really in the picture, just how the pieces fit together to implement this. And then changing focus to Config Manager Integration, implementing and managing Windows Update for Business there. And then we'll wrap up the session with a bit of discussion about troubleshooting, tips and tricks, and so forth for that, right? So what is Windows Update for Business? You oftentimes hear Windows Update for Business described as a free cloud service. I put a question mark here on purpose, because is Windows Update really a cloud service? Not really. You could argue that maybe it does have a cloud service aspect, meaning that the updates that you're downloading are coming from the cloud. But really, Windows Update for Business is just a series of settings, right? It's another type of setting, a classification of settings that are available for you to deploy that you'll see in a minute. They're specific to Windows 10. They work alongside your standard update-related settings. And so really, Windows Update for Business kind of can be viewed more like a label about the way you plan to manage your update deployments, another update deployment option that you can leverage. Windows Update for Business is Windows 10 specific. The coverage for Windows 10 includes the feature and quality updates with Windows Update for Business and Windows 10. The beauty of this approach is in terms of the way that you can now deploy and manage updates. You don't need to have any infrastructure installed at all. There's no software to install. There's no approval cycles you have to go through each month. There's no deployments to manage each month. It's basically setting the configuration, and then the configuration takes care of itself. In terms of supported versions of Windows 10, we cover Windows 10 Pro, Enterprise, and Education, a little bit in the mobile space as well. And Windows Update for Business has actually been in the product since build 1511 of Windows 10. Now, you'll mostly hear some of the goodness talked about and some of the real growth of capabilities in Windows Update for Business starting about 1607, but you do see it arrive in 1511, and then we significantly enhance it going forward and continue to have done so, as you'll see in a bit. So updates versus Windows Update for Business, right? So I just kind of list out a few of the updates, the kind of settings that you would expect to find in the updates node of the configuration, right? Things like allow auto updates, active hours, maintenance windows, and there's a lot more. Then there's a section of updates, a category of updates that are really Windows Update for Business specific, again, dealing with Windows 10. The idea of branch readiness level, deferring feature updates, deferring quality updates, more of them, right? And those only make sense in a Windows 10 world. So really, when you kind of pare it all down, you really kind of have a mixing of these worlds to ultimately deliver the experience that most administrators are going to build out when configuring Windows Update for Business, right? The lines do blur a bit, so just know, kind of the big buckets are Windows 10 specific, and then applicable to general updates would just be the general updates category. So why do we care about Windows Update for Business? Well, put simply, it's simple, right? You'll hear me say this probably a couple of times. There's no longer a need to approve individual updates. There's no longer a need to approve deployments to groups of devices on an ongoing basis. And and so on. Yes, there's organization that can be done with Windows Update for Business, and we'll talk about some of that and the ways you do it and so on. But really, it's not an ongoing monthly cycle like ConfigMgr admins or update administrators are accustomed to doing every single month currently. Efficiency. So with Windows Update for Business, we benefit from reduced management costs, minimal ongoing configuration and maintenance required. Again, no infrastructure to acquire and support and maintain. Windows 10 definitely has changed the approach to the way that we do update deployment, same with Server 2016, so that we really are out of the cycle of needing to choose which updates to deploy month to month to month. This basically gives you the streamlined approach that makes Windows Update for Business a perfect option for being able to kind of set things and let them run. Right? No creation, maintenance of software update groups, deployments kind of like we've talked about. Very flexible, so you're able to specifically apply Windows Update for Business to devices in your organization that make sense, right? They could be local devices that are on your corporate network. We can definitely do that in certain ways that might make sense. They could be remote devices. You might want to do both, right? It's completely up to you. Very configurable. So one concern about going to Windows Update for Business might be that you would lose the kind of controls that you're accustomed to having in a scenario like ConfigMgr. But you really don't. Yeah, I mean, there are some differences, yes, but you have a significant amount of control available with Windows Update for Business, as you will see. One of the things we talk about a lot with Windows 10 deployments is the idea of servicing rings, where you can define for your own organization how feature updates will roll out and be applied and the timing of doing so. That same approach applies to Windows Update for Business deployments as well. Maintenance windows is another big one that organizations sometimes need to use in order to time out when updates get deployed. You have that available in Windows Update for Business. Peer-to-peer delivery. That's really not a strict Windows Update for Business kind of thing, but there is a piece called deployment optimization. We'll talk about that near the end of the presentation. I'll show it to you. Just a brief overview. But that's available as well, right? So, and I could go on. There's just a lot of parity in terms of the kinds of things you can configure and options that you have. Compatibility. So Windows Update for Business integrates, it works with your existing management tools. You can use it standalone. You can use it in conjunction with WSUS, with ConfigMgr, with EMS, with third-party type systems as well, right? So very easy to plug in. Reliable. Really, it's one of those things that you can set and kind of monitor how it's doing. For sure, you want to do that. But again, it's just something that kind of will happen from month to month to month. Things will roll out based on the configurations that you specify when building Windows Update for Business. So with that, what are the requirements for Windows Update for Business? Right? So I'll list out a few. Certainly, your systems that are going to participate in Windows Update for Business need to have connectivity to the internet, right? Windows 10 needs to be the operating system that you're deploying. We support a number of different versions. So we even support mobile flavors of Windows 10, so Mobile Enterprise and IoT. We don't support straight Windows 10 Mobile, but even with the mobile editions, we do have not full support. It's more of a limited kind of subset of operations in the docs. You really go into good detail about that. Education, Pro, and Enterprise, fully supported, right? Another thing is, in order to leverage this, your Windows 10 systems have to be generating at least the basic level of telemetry, and we'll talk about a couple of options to set that here in just a minute. So what scenarios might you bring to bear for, or better said, what kind of scenarios would Windows Update for Business help address? Well, there's a few that I list out. There's probably more that you could list out as you explore options in your own organization, but certainly remote users, users who primarily have their devices at home or are roaming and on the road a lot, traveling, so on. Special use devices, headless devices, kiosk devices, devices that are mobile, in vehicles or whatever, right? So a few of those. Local users even. So if you have a local WAN connected office, but that connection is very slow, kind of unreliable, poor, but the internet connection is good, well, then Windows Update for Business might be an interesting option there because it doesn't require going across that slower WAN link. Again, no local distribution point infrastructure necessary in those situations. So maybe you're working to migrate to Windows 10, and whenever you fully migrate an office to Windows 10, it makes sense to switch over to Windows Update for Business from whatever you were using before, right? So as you think about this, really consider what various scenarios might benefit from Windows Update for Business. If nothing else, having this knowledge and knowing how Windows Update for Business works is just another tool belt in the suite of different things that IT administrators can bring to bear to solve certain scenarios, right? As you look across your business, it may not be that Windows Update for Business solves the majority of circumstances, and you're not really in a position to switch over to it. That's great, but there could be those scenarios that it does solve and would work very well to help your business make sure that your systems stay updated. So turning into the fun stuff, where we're starting to get into some demos. So implementing and managing Windows Update for Business. So this is generic Windows Update for Business. This is not pulling in ConfigMgr Integration discussion yet. That will come next. So what you see here is just basically a list showing the available settings that you can configure for Windows Update for Business. And these are not just Windows Update for Business settings. These are also generic Windows Update settings, right? Windows Update for Business settings are a specific type of setting, again, targeted toward helping in the Windows 10 environment. So as you look across from left to right, version 15.11 all the way through 17.09, you'll see the different settings that we've added along the way. So for example, in 16.07, you see that we've added active hours, and then that's a generic Windows Update setting. Allow Microsoft Update service, that's generic, but then we get the Windows Update for Business branch readiness level, defer updates, and then we keep going, right? Pause updates, this is also Windows 10 specific in Windows Update for Business settings. And then you see other things in terms of setting schedules during the week, and again, generic for Windows updates, and so, but very applicable to Windows Update for Business, right? So these are all the settings. You can take a look at them. You can see just in this list, there's a tremendous number of them available to you. And again, the support for the various operating systems are listed. One thing I will call out, some policies are version dependent. Some have been added, some have been deprecated, some are only for that version. Specific, you will see some that are on 15.11, and then you will see those, what looks to be the same kind of setting listed again under one of the other versions, 16.07, 17.03, or 17.09. And really what that means is we basically revamped that setting for use in a 16.07, 17.03, 17.09 environment. A few of those settings right there with 15.11 are specific just to 15.11. And then on the right for 17.09, there's the dual scan that I've highlighted. I've highlighted that because it's really important to understand dual scan, and because we'll talk about dual scan near the end of the presentation. I want to talk to you about how that works. So in terms of generic Windows Update or implementing Windows Update for Business, I want to walk through how you would do that. And there's really two broad areas that we'll talk about. First is telemetry, because we do need to have telemetry enabled in order to have the system be able to work with the Windows Update for Business acquisition of updates and so on, right? There's a couple of different ways to set telemetry. I'll show you one of them, right? And I'll talk about the others. And then we'll talk about the available settings, how you would go about setting various settings and different ways to do that. These 5 ways: manual, group policy, registry, Intune, and ConfigMgr. Now, I could spend a lot of time going through setting by setting by setting how we go through and implement these things. Don't want to do it. I'm going to really focus on a few settings kind of smattered across from the various operating system versions as an effort just to show you how you implement these things and go from there. So that said, let's pull in the lab. So here is just a Windows 10 system that I will use to demonstrate. So the first thing is we want to make sure that telemetry is being sent from the system. So I'm just going to show you how to validate it in the registry. Again, you can set telemetry through GPO, through MDM, or you can just go into the registry. You can even set this through ConfigMgr, a compliance setting, for example. But telemetry basically is stored local machine, or the settings for sending telemetry. Software, Microsoft, Windows, scroll down here, Windows, current version, and then policies, scroll over to the right, policies, there we are, and then data collection right here. This option, allow telemetry, is set to currently 3 because I've just said allow all the telemetry to be sent in my lab. It needs to be at least a value of 1 because 1 equals, the value of 1 translates to send the basic level of telemetry, which is the minimum required for Windows Update for Business to work, right? All right, so let's pull that out. Now, once we have telemetry configured, we know that's working, then we can implement the Windows Update for Business settings. Now, there's a couple of ways to do it. First is manual. So I'll just show you the manual part is done through the Settings app. And so here we can just go into Updates and Security. And, I don't know, do something like set active hours, right? So let's look at advanced options and scroll down. Oops. Did I miss it? This one I remember, yeah, I've got this up here, so it's kind of masking me. Let me go ahead and just use my settings applet on my desktop here. Same difference. So I'll go into here and updates and security. And here, I can change, so the first one is active hours, right? I can change my active hours. Now this is a Windows 10 feature. It's not something that is strictly an update thing, but it's part of Windows, the Windows 10 system. So in ConfigMgr, the first place that you might remember seeing something like this is business hours in the Software Center, but really that's always been an OS setting. So you can change it here. Now you see that the max range allowed is an 18-hour time frame, right? Now you can change that. There's another setting to allow you to modify the active hours range, but when you're in the UI, it doesn't make sense to modify the active hours range. You can certainly set the active hours range through a policy, and then you would be subject to that range whenever you come in here, but having an option to configure active hours range in the UI, it's not there. It doesn't make sense. In terms of detection frequency, again, kind of not really making sense in a UI kind of thing. Disable dual scan is really not something strictly in the UI, although you do see, no, that's delivery optimization. Yeah, it doesn't really make sense to set the dual scan options. That's more of an IT admin level kind of thing, so it's not in the UI. But we do have the 5th or the 6th setting in the UI, which is delivery optimization. You can come in here and set all the options for delivery optimization, and we'll again talk about delivery optimization as we progress, right? So that's in the UI, and some things are there and some things aren't. There's other ways that you can set all of these, and it's group policies. So just for convenience, I have local policy here. I'll show you the settings, same as in domain policy. I just open it up here, and you see I'm in computer, admin templates, Windows components, Windows update, and here we are. Right? So all of these settings are configurable in Windows or in here, a lot more than what I've got configured. So in terms of what I have called out for examples, Detection frequency is 1, so I have that configured. It's available here. This is one of those, again, it's a generic update setting. It is applicable to non-Windows 10 OSs as well as Windows 10, so I can set that. I have the ability to enable or not enable deferral policy. Now this one is one specific. You can't really tell from the name, but this allows you to define whether dual scan, again, we'll talk about dual scan later, whether dual scan is allowed to be configured on this machine or not. Go on down, setting the active hours range. So you do have the ability to set the range of time here. And then the start and end times for what your active hours are going to be are configured here in policy. Right? So that's one way to do it. Another way is to just go directly to the registry and configure. So let's go there again. And so here, let's go back up and start the tree again. So software, Microsoft, I'm going to collapse this. We're going to be under policies and then Microsoft. And then here we are under Windows and Windows Update. So we have a number of different settings that you can see are already configured here. I've got my active hours max range. I've got my active hours in, my active hours start, whether I'm allowing dual scan to be enabled, disabled, and so on. If I go into a subnode, I see a detection frequency that I can set and so forth, right? So all of these, there's settings that you don't see here because they're not configured through group policy and enforce, but you can always edit the registry directly and put those settings in. Confirm using the registry and so forth. Right, so that's a third way. Now, you can also use Intune or MDM, any MDM, any third-party product that will set MDM settings. Any product, frankly, that will set MDM settings, you can use to configure through the MDM channel these same things. So let me pull in quickly just my Intune console and show you how we would do that. So I don't want to spend too much time here because this is really not a session where I'm intending to talk about Intune a lot. I'm just going to show you this as an indicator of how you would apply some of these settings with Intune. I'm actually going to show you Intune twice. So here, if we go into device compliance, device configuration and add a new profile. So one of the things that we can choose, let me just choose Windows 10 real quick. So when we're configuring things through MDM, through the MDM channel with Intune or a third-party product, one of the things that's really nice to have is a UI that's built to help you configure some of the settings that you care about. But with the release cycle of Windows 10 and the wide number of device configuration or configurations that are available through the MDM channel, sometimes the UI is not fully up to date. It doesn't mean that we can't use the UI or the product to manage that setting. Clearly, you can easily use Intune to manage any setting that is available through the MDM channel, even if there's not some pre-built UI for it. It just has to be done differently. So, for example, I have all of these categories of configurations, and then I have custom, right? So this custom configuration, I just show you the options, and I'm not going to fill it out here. I'll show you in ConfigMgr the same kind of setting completed. You can actually specify using the OMA URI descriptors and so on how to configure a setting. A little bit of a different way to look at it. It's not hard. A lot of guidance available on the web about how these options can be addressed and so on. I just show this to you so that you know, hey, even before, so I'm going to show you in Intune here in a minute that we actually have a nice UI option to configure now these Windows Update for Business settings. And that's great. Not all of them, right? Not all of them. So you still may need to configure some of the settings through the method I just showed you, through using the Configuration Service Provider, CSP, which is how we deliver it through MDM, right? But and even without that nice UI, we can deliver it very well. Right? So let me pull this back out. I'll come to Intune again here in a bit. In the meantime, I'll show you the equivalent with Configuration Manager. Here, let me pull this server in. So with Configuration Manager, again, we have Windows Update for Business integration. That's the point of this. I'm going to show you that in a minute. But even before we had the nice UI, we had the ability to build settings using the configuration service provider. So the way you would do it, the way you would build any setting for using the MDM channel, right? Now, precursor to this, we did a discussion a while back where I showed you how to actually manage Windows 10 devices in a Configuration Manager environment using MDM instead of the classic Configuration Manager agent. So you would have to have some systems here that are being managed by MDM. And so here I'm just going to go create a configuration item. And when this pops up, I'm going to select specifically that the system I'm going to manage is not managed with a Config Manager client, meaning it's going to be the MDM channel. I'm just going to say test here and work through it. I'm not going to select anything but Windows 10, and I'm not going to configure any of the settings. Go back and do that again. This takes a second to paint sometimes here. Let me let it paint and there we go. Okay, cool. And so I'm not going to set anything here. So I'm basically going to create a blank container, right? A blank configuration item, because then I can go back into that configuration item and configure my settings using the MDM channel. So I just built this one. I'm not going to keep it around. Don't need to. I already have one built, easy enough to show. And so I just picked the setting, active hours, max range. You go to properties on it. And if I would have gone into the test one, I'd do the same thing. I'm just going to come into settings, and you see that I have a setting already here configured with the OMA URI channel. If I just add a new one, you'll see that the options I have a registry value or OMA URI here, right? So I'm going to cancel out. And so if I edit this one, I'm specifying with this setting where to configure, where to look. This is the particular syntax that will take me down to the setting for active hours max range. It's using OMA URI. You'll find this documented in our CSP, Configuration Service Provider documentation. It is case sensitive, right? So this is where I'm going to configure. I know it's a configuration because it's right here, config, right? And then I'm going to configure the specific value. Instead of 18, which is the default, I'm going to tell it configure to 12 and remediate systems that are not configured this way. Right? So that's as easy as that. I have a configuration item that I can then add to a baseline and deploy to systems and manage all of these settings, no problem at all. In fact, I could just continue to do it that way if I wanted to. Right? If I had built a lot of settings like this and built a profile of things to manage Windows Update for Business before the UI got introduced, well, I may just want to continue to use this, right? The settings that I built. Anyway, so that's how you do it with Configuration Manager. Let me pull this out here and also pull back out this system that I forgot was still up there. Cool. Now, in terms of after you have the updates configured, deployed, and different configurations, we will want to monitor the compliance, how these updates are being delivered in the environment, if our systems are up to speed, and so on. And there are a few options. So in terms of these Windows Update for Business enabled systems, one way that you could do it is to actually hook up those systems to our update compliance solution. That's an OMS component. So if you look in the solution gallery for OMS in Azure, you'll see update compliance. And that's a very good engine to be able to connect up your systems to, even those maybe without Windows Update for Business or servers or whatever makes sense, and let the update compliance service, again, part of OMS, actually show you how you're doing for those systems that are participating in the environment, give you a table, similar to this. With Intune, let me pull this back in. There's the ability to kind of monitor how things go there. Let me collapse this and collapse. Let me scroll down. Here we go. So we have the software updates node. We'll come back here in a minute. We talked about the idea of rings, right? So not only can you get an overview, now this is my lab, so I don't have any data, but you get a nice overview of the deployment status for all update rings for the device. You can look per update ring right here. Again, my lab, kind of boring, and see the update status, there, and even go in and see the details there if I were to have any, which I don't, and you can see them there, right? Now for ConfigMgr is an interesting one. We'll talk about it more as we get closer to the end of the presentation. There are some caveats with ConfigMgr. ConfigMgr works great for reporting results for systems it patches, but for Windows Update for Business, there is no ability for ConfigMgr itself to apply the patches to systems, and so it's not going to get the data back about the status of those updates so easily. And so you might use something like update compliance on those systems just to get the readout and so forth. So that's managing Windows Update for Business, kind of standalone. So let's turn the page and talk about ConfigMgr specific integration. And so here, really going to talk about two things. Intune really quick, just to show you kind of the settings, the nice UI look in Intune. And then ConfigMgr we'll talk about specifically. Let me just pull in Intune one last time here. So going back to our navigation, and I'm already in the software updates node. Here we have the ability to configure rings. Again, talked about rings, right? And how you can use those to deploy to your organization. Well, if I go into this policy I've already created and look at the properties and the configuration, you'll see that I've got a number of different settings here that are very nice in the UI. Don't need to use for those the CSP, Configuration Service Provider, to actually implement these. Although these are actually being implemented through the Configuration Service Provider. It's just the UI is a nice way to configure them using the same OMA URI channel, just configured in a nice UI. And you'll notice there's a mix here of Windows Update for Business specific settings and also non-Windows Update for Business, just generic update settings. And so here we are, right? So it's a nice UI. These are most of the settings you probably would care about for Windows 10 and setting up Windows Update for Business. All right, so let's go ahead and pull that up. In fact, I'll go ahead and close it for now. So in terms of ConfigMgr, let's take a look there. So first, what are the requirements? Well, in order for ConfigMgr to manage a Windows 10 system and apply Windows Update for Business settings to it, that Windows 10 system needs to be 1703. Now, I mentioned that Windows Update for Business was introduced in 1511 and really started to stabilize around the 1607 release. You can apply Windows Update for Business settings to previous versions of Windows. You can apply to 1607, no problem, just not through ConfigMgr. The ConfigMgr environment needs to be applying against Windows 10 1703. If you want to apply to previous versions, then just use GPO, right? That would work fine. Okay. There's also a piece, again, I'll just mention it here, we'll talk about it more in focus in a minute, called dual scan. So one thing I want to just mention here, because it's really important to understand, and I'll probably say it again, if you are leveraging ConfigMgr to configure and apply your Windows Update for Business deferral policies, which you haven't seen yet, and I'll show you, then that action will cause ConfigMgr to enable dual scan. Say it again. If you are using ConfigMgr to configure your Windows Update for Business deferral policies, by default, that means the Windows 10 system where those configurations are applied through ConfigMgr will be enabled for dual scan. Again, dual scan, talk about it shortly. So beyond requirements, we have configurations. So how do we do that? There's two pieces there. There's client settings, and then there's actually configuring the Windows Update for Business policy. So to talk about these, let's go ahead and pull the ConfigMgr environment back in. And here we go. And so in terms of client settings, let's go to Administration, Client Settings. You see that I have my Windows Update for Business policy here. Okay, so open that up. There's really two things that we want to consider here. So the first is this Windows Analytics. So I mentioned earlier that you do need to have telemetry enabled on your Windows 10 systems in order for them to participate in Windows Update for Business. In client settings, we give you a nice convenient place to be able to manipulate whether what you're on basic or full or enhanced or whatever version of telemetry. Here's the thing to understand. This Windows Analytics piece really is here to help you configure systems to provide the telemetry needed for update readiness, upgrade readiness, whatever. An OMS piece to help you with your Windows 7 to Windows 10 upgrades or Windows 10 to Windows 10, whatever. In order to provide that information to OMS, you need to have a commercial ID key. You may not have that, and if you don't have that, great. You can still set telemetry using ConfigMgr. Use compliance settings, or set it outside of ConfigMgr with GPO, whatever. Add it directly in the registry, whatever it is you want to do. But if you're not using upgrade readiness and you don't have a commercial ID key, then you're going to have challenges getting telemetry enabled in this way on those Windows 10 systems, and since telemetry is required, kind of would block you, right? But if you do have upgrade readiness connected, this is just a way to manage your telemetry, no problem, right? Okay, so not a strict client settings requirement, but a convenience if you want to do it. If you are using Windows Update for Business, we recommend you turn off the software updates client agent on those clients because you're letting Windows Update for Business take care of things, right? All right. In terms of what else you need to do, there's it's good to have a knowledge of which systems are actually configured for Windows Update for Business. So there's actually an inventory property that will tell you if a system is configured for Windows Update for Business. Let's go look at that real quick. So if I look at my devices, let's look in the collection. I only have the one device right now for Windows Update for Business, but I right-click on it, Start Resource Explorer, and I look at my hardware inventory, then I will have a Windows Update section. And in that Windows Update section, I will be collecting, if it exists, use WU server, right? What this means is, will this client be using Windows Update Server or will it be using WSUS? If you have a value of 2, that means this system is configured to use Windows Update for Business, right? So you can group these systems, and there's all sorts of reasons you would want to group these systems. One would be just to know which ones are enabled for Windows Update for Business, which ones aren't. As you'll see in a little bit, that's really important to understand whenever you're trying to rationalize your ConfigMgr environment. The other might be that you want to build rings based on knowing which systems and what type have Windows Update for Business enabled, and that's the primary source, and et cetera, right? So that's here, and it will collect that value in the registry. All right, so that just leaves us with configuring the Windows Update for Business policies. If I go to Software Library, right here, talk about the ring approach. I'm kind of showing it really quick here. I've just got Ring 1 deployed. And so if I look at the properties for Ring 1, just like you saw in Intune, the nice UI for setting some of the Windows Update for Business settings, you will have a nice UI for setting the Windows Update for Business specific settings here. Specifically, this is enabling you to determine settings for feature updates, for quality updates, setting your branch readiness level, what kind of deferral period you're going to have, if you're going to pause updates for whatever reason for a given time, whether you want to install updates for other Microsoft products as a part of the process, and drivers and whatever, right? So this is configuring the policy, no problem. You can do that and save it. You can deploy it like any other deployment. So I have my deployment available here. I'm in my lab doing this every 30 minutes just because I want to do it quicker. In production, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have to do that, right? But that's how it works. And if this looks similar to a compliance setting to you, then you would be correct. This is a compliance setting kind of configuration. You can't really see it like a compliance setting on the client, but that's how it works, right? That's the engine that it uses. So that's configuring Windows Update for Business settings in ConfigMgr. You noticed a couple of settings that weren't there in the UI. The active hours settings aren't configurable in the UI right now in ConfigMgr. You can configure those still with compliance settings, maybe GPO, whatever you use, right? They're there. Okay, so that's configuration. Now, what about troubleshooting, right? So that's how you set it up. How do you troubleshoot this in case things aren't looking the way that they should? Well, so I have a system that is targeted, the one I included for in the Windows Update for Business collection. We're getting the settings down according to that. So if you have a challenge with telemetry, let me just show you in ConfigMgr. We actually have a log, a new log. Seem to be adding logs all the time as new features come out, called Windows Telemetry, or Windows Analytics. Here it is, sorry. And so Windows or ConfigMgr will scan the telemetry registry key to see whether things are set correctly, and it will be able to set things correctly if you've configured it to do so in client settings. So here's an example of the log. So first, I just want to call out that basically this was not doing really anything at first. It was certainly recognizing some of the settings that needed to be configured, but it wasn't doing much of anything because it didn't have the commercial ID. So I fixed that, and then we went ahead and noticed that was changed and made some configurations and so on. Now, notice this one. So whenever I had this setting in place, the level, I think this is which one this is, was set to 3. But we had a log that said, okay, hang on, please set your telemetry to basic or above. So I think this is probably a logging bug. I don't know for sure. I'd have to dig into it. But this shouldn't appear if your telemetry is set correctly, right? So I went ahead and just moved that on down and changed it back to 1. And so that's basic, as it was saying up here, and I don't have that logging bug. So kind of an interesting thing to observe there. But this is one way, if you're using ConfigMgr to set telemetry, to be sure that it actually worked. Right now, if you're not using ConfigMgr to set telemetry through Windows Analytics, then just check in the registry, as I showed you earlier, to be able to confirm that the setting is there and appropriate. And move this out of the way. There's another log. So if we progress from there and everything's working and we've actually configured Windows Update for Business policy and we've deployed that to the machine, then there's another log that kind of records that working. You might have seen it already, called Windows Update for Business Handler. And as you open this log, you would expect to see us applying the various settings that you configured, but you actually don't see that. What you do see is that we are creating an instance of the provider that is used to actually configure the Windows Update for Business settings. You can tell that we are applying it through the MDM mechanism, through the configuration service provider stuff that I showed you. This is being done by the ConfigMgr client directly. So one might see this and think, well, that's happening through a config manager system managed by MDM. No, because a config manager system managed by MDM doesn't even have the client on it, and there's no logging because it doesn't have the client on it. So you can definitely tell this is the client, the config manager client, using the MDM channel. Now, let's kind of trace this down a bit. So what is this provider? So let's go to WMI, because we know that's where all of our providers are, and run that. And I'm going to connect, and if I look, this is actually in the SymV2 namespace under MDM, and right here under DM map. So I'll load that up, and there's a whole bunch of MDM stuff right here. So you just scroll down and get to MDM underscore policy underscore config01 underscore, let's expand that, update 02. So this is our provider. So I'll just double click on it, and I would expect to see instances here, except that I'm not seeing them, right? But yet my settings are configured correctly in the registry. So the best I can tell, not having dug into it more, is that we just use these settings that are in this provider to deploy the settings. And I know those settings are there because if I go to the registry, and this is interesting too, let me show you this. I showed you before that I went to, in order to see the Windows Update settings, I went to Software, Policies, Microsoft, Windows, and Windows Update, right? Now, interestingly, before I started doing this, or whenever I was first testing on this client, there was no Windows Update key here in the registry. I actually added this myself. I thought, well, something might be a little bit amiss here because I expected the settings to show up here. There's no settings here. There's no settings here directly on that key. There's no settings here on the automatic update key except for this one, right? So once I realized this was being set by MDM, I realized there's a different registry key that we need to look at for that. So let's go back up to local machine software, Microsoft, and then under Microsoft, we have Policy Manager. Policy Manager down here, Policy Manager, expand that. And then under Policy Manager, we have Current. And under Current, we have Device. And then under Device, finally, we have Update. And if you look at these are all of the various update-related settings that are available. And I showed you on the Config Manager side how I had adjusted a couple of those settings. The two that are front of mind for me are the deferral settings for how many days to defer. One of them I set to 10, you see 10 right here. The other I set to 7, you see 7 right here. And I could go find the other ones. I think I allowed updates beyond just Microsoft updates and so on, and I could find them here and so on. But this is where you can confirm that we indeed set things the way that we intended. Right, so this is kind of the check to make sure that Config Manager received the settings and implemented the settings and so on. Right. So let me pull this out. So that's kind of a walkthrough of how this thing works end to end. Really not that complicated, but good to kind of understand how the pieces fit together and moving parts and so on. Let me change focus a bit to basically some tips and tricks. And want to walk through a couple of things here. So just generically, some tips and tricks specifically with Config Manager interacting with a client configured for Windows Update for Business. There's a few caveats here, right? So updates published to Windows Update. So here, this assumes that the Config Manager client is being managed by Windows Update for Business, which means that whatever updates have been deployed, Config Manager is going to be completely unaware of those updates that are published to Windows Update. It's not really linked in that way. The Config Manager clients configured to receive the updates from Windows Update will display unknown for those updates in the ConfigMan console. What's interesting about that is unknown historically has been a signal that we haven't received scan results back from the client. And we can't assume that anymore. That's where the grouping of the systems that are being managed by Windows Update for Business is important. so that you can kind of exclude those and know that that's kind of a normal status for them. Otherwise, it can get confusing. So software updates client agent, talked about that we do recommend disabling the software updates client agent on those systems being managed by Windows Update for Business. Conditional access. A lot of times conditional access will check to see if a system is in compliance with updates in ConfigMgr. If we have a system managed by Windows Update for Business, we can't do that because we don't know the compliance status in ConfigMgr any longer. Definition updates won't work as expected. Update deployments. ConfigMgr won't be able to deploy updates like Office or IE or Visual Studio because we've turned off the software updates agent. We're having Windows Update for Business manage those systems. Won't be able to deploy third-party updates that are published to our local WSUS. And finally, client deployment won't work either because we have WSUS disconnected from these systems. And that's a lot of, those are a lot of caveats. And you may look at this and think, well, I can't see where this would be useful for me with all of these caveats. And I totally understand that. However, think through your scenarios, right? There may be scenarios where you have systems that it does make sense to try to implement something like Windows Update for Business so you keep that system updated all the time, even at the expense of some of these caveats, right? And again, it's just Windows Update for Business is a tool in your tool belt. We give you many tools, including the Cloud Management Gateway, Cloud Distribution Point, Internet-based client management. You have VPNs that you can connect in, right? So we don't know your specific scenario. You do, and leverage Windows Update for Business where it makes sense for you. All right. So a couple of things that I want to talk about as we're rounding down the session. So two specific things I want to focus on. First is delivery optimization. I showed you this. You probably saw it in a slide or two, and I even showed you in the UI where you can configure this as I was going through. It's worth calling out. This is not a specific Windows Update for Business setting. It's one that can be leveraged with a couple of different solutions. So WSUS, Windows Update itself, and so on, right? But what this is, right? What is delivery optimization? Ultimately, what this is yet another caching solution that you can use with the goal of being able to optimize how content for updates is delivered, deployed in your environment, right? Now, this is the cloud managed solution. It is kind of a self-organizing distributed caching solution. And again, the reason you care about it is it's going to reduce the bandwidth that you use during download of operating system updates, operating system upgrades, right? It's going to leverage peers, right, for Windows Update deployment, right? In addition to being able to use the Windows Update servers themselves. Used in conjunction with all of the different updating mechanisms, again, Windows Update, WSUS, Windows Update for Business, and as I've already inferred, the functionality here is really similar to what we have in branch cache, what we talked about in a recent session with the new peer caching in ConfigMgr, what some of the solutions are out there for from our third-party partners, right, that offer caching solutions. Very similar kind of mindset. This, again, specific to update delivery. Okay, so how do you configure update delivery? Well, again, showed you in the UI where you can do it, and then there's also a GPO setting that you can go configure. You can also do it through MDM. You can set up ConfigMgr to manage this, either with compliance settings or through the MDM channel or whatever, Intune. So a lot of different ways, just like for standard update policy, that you can actually go administer this. The table I put together to kind of show the different options that are available for you to configure delivery optimization to work the way you want it to, right? So the key one, the one key setting above all the others is the download mode, which helps define how delivery optimization is going to work to download updates in your environment. There's a group ID where you can, similar to how you do with boundary groups and peer cache in ConfigMgr, you basically can assign systems by group ID and kind of lump them together. You see settings in here for managing the cache age and the content download, file size and percent max download bandwidth, and on we go, right? So won't dig into this anymore, but it's definitely worthy of consideration. It does kind of stand outside a little bit of the generic Windows Update for Business discussion, but it's definitely key to it as well. And finally, this thing called dual scan I've referenced a couple of times. So this is really, really important for all ConfigMgr admins to understand, right? So what is dual scan? Well, dual scan is basically an updated configuration available now in the Windows Update client configuration. This was introduced as of Windows 10 16.07. What it does is it enables kind of a change of the way the Windows Update client works. So historically, on the left, we would have the Windows Update client, and it would go talk to our WSUS server, and that would be the source for all of its updates that the Windows Update client needs. If you enable this thing called dual scan, what happens is the client, the Windows Update agent, will no longer look at WSUS for any Microsoft updates. Instead, it will go to the cloud. It will try to use the cloud as its source for downloading those updates. We can still pull non-Microsoft updates from WSUS, but effectively, in a ConfigMgr environment, when this change goes into place, that machine no longer is going to be able to patch from ConfigMgr because it's not going to be able to get the bulk of the updates that you care about, the Microsoft updates. I shouldn't say it won't be able to patch. It won't be able to patch the updates that you probably have the bulk of the concern about, and that is the Microsoft updates. Probably still get the third-party updates, no problem. It's because essentially this update tells that Windows Update client ignore all of the updates, the Microsoft updates from WSUS, and instead get them from Windows Update. So that being true, why did we ever do this? What is the purpose of dual scan? Well, as more organizations progress toward modern management, it seemed that with the cloud-first mentality and the cloud-first approach, that being able to shift over and use the cloud as a source for updates is a desirable thing, right? Because we don't have the administrative overhead of ongoing configuration, update approval, and so on. It just kind of is something you set and let it go, and you monitor it. But the impact, again, to ConfigMgr clients was pretty notable, right? In fact, if you ever see that you are not able to actually patch in bulk anymore, that should be one of the things that you look for, is somehow to dual scan get turned on, right? Which is interesting, because then we talk about configuring dual scan. And if you look in Windows 10 16.07, there is no specific setting that says enable dual scan, right? So the way it gets enabled is there's actually one main setting, specify, as you see in the table here, specify intranet Microsoft Update Service location, and then if you pair that with either the select when feature updates are received or select when quality updates are received, and you pair those together, you are turning on dual scan, right? And that's what got people into trouble, is administrators, rightly so, wanted to be able to say, no, I want to control when feature updates are received, so they started making those configurations in GPO. They also had the first setting enabled, and magically we now have dual scan turned on, and ConfigMgr updates are broken, right? So that's kind of how we got into it. It caused quite a stir whenever that first happened. And so now, because of that, and as of 1703, I believe, actually 1709, as I recall, there is now this setting in GPO to basically say don't configure dual scan. Basically, don't allow configuring. The wording is don't allow configuring deferral to cause dual scan to turn on, kind of thing. And so there is that specific setting now, right? A little bit more detail, right? So dual scan specifically in ConfigMgr, we do, if you are kind of going to use ConfigMgr to deploy the deferral policies, you are going to want to be on ConfigMgr 1706. Right? 1702 client will accept the deferral policies, but then it will periodically overwrite them and just blank them out. Right? If you are, so this is really important, if you are using ConfigMgr to implement your Windows Update for Business policies, you will be enabling dual scan. If you want to deploy your Windows Update for Business policies without enabling dual scan, then you need to do it by GPO today. That may change in the future, don't know, but as of 1706 of ConfigMgr, that's true, right? Anyway, so dual scan, really important to understand, and so on. So that's really all I wanted to cover with Windows Update for Business. It gives a good end-to-end for it. It's something that you should understand in your organization, apply where it makes sense. And that will wrap up our discussion for today. We will see you